Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to our latest LinkedIn Live, hosted by Thriving Talent. Before I introduce myself, I want to hand over to my colleague, Eleanor, to introduce herself and say a little something about what she does here in the business.
Thanks, Natalie. Probably a couple of you know me already. Also hosted, I think, the last two LinkedIn Lives. So hopefully there'll be a couple of people that enjoy this and come back again. But if you don't know me, then my name's Eleanor Neville. I'm head of client accounts at Thriving Talent, so I'm responsible for the existing client business, and a team of account managers. And I also consult, train, facilitate myself on all things DEI, especially if the work is in German or in Swiss German, because I'm based in Zurich and bilingual between English and German. And yeah, I manage a lot of our client accounts, which is why these questions that we'll be discussing today with Natalie are questions that I hear a lot. So we thought it would be a good idea to discuss some of those here with you live, so that hopefully we'll provide you some answers. Natalie, what about you? Who are you?
So I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Thriving Talent, and I've been working as a trainer and a facilitator for over 25 years. I started my career as a behavioral trainer in the corporate world, and I love learning. I love helping other people learn and transform and really optimize the way that they navigate their life, their work. And diversity, equity, and inclusion is such an interesting topic to design and facilitate training. So I'm really glad that the two of us can be here today to share our knowledge, our experience with others about this topic. And I think our colleagues who helped us to promote this LinkedIn Live, I think framed what we want to really cover with you all today really beautifully, which is about, helping you think about where you should start or what the next approach in training could be if you're already on this journey of diversity, equity, inclusion. So please use this opportunity, if you're here with us live, to post your questions in the comments, because we have time for those as well. We want to be able to pass on and be helpful to you, as well as some of the questions we've anticipated and prepared for. So Eleanor, you've got the questions, so I'm going to let you kick off.
Yeah, so I thought we'll start by putting ourselves in the shoes maybe of some of the people that are watching this either live or as a recording. So let's assume, Natalie, you're a new or newish DEI manager. You've been given targets, maybe to achieve, or some targets, possibly around achieving more gender equality, maybe bringing more awareness to the topic. Where do you start? How do you build a bit of a business case? How do you build more commitment? And how do you engage especially senior management on this topic?
Yeah. I think this is a really great place to start when it's new to the organization, because it makes a huge difference when this starts at the top and when executive leaders and senior leadership teams understand the issue at hand, understand the role that they can play and how they can influence this journey in the organization. And where I've seen things accelerate and gain momentum is when the CEO or a C-level leader is really championing and sponsoring this and understands the critical nature that this plays in their culture and the benefits that's going to create for their business. If you do have one of those types of leaders in your senior level team, then really maximize this opportunity and offer to host a workshop to get the other colleagues around the table to explore this together in a non-judgmental, safe way. I think that's so important, because I think most leadership teams are male dominated. And I think for many men entering this topic, maybe for the first time, or who feel new and uncomfortable about it, it's important to create that safety and to give them a voice to ask the questions and to understand things better, again, without judgment or shame in any way. And, if you think about the way you would present or influence any person in business, there's different types of personalities who need different types of information communication to understand the importance of something and to feel the need to act and change and take action themselves. So you've got to keep those different types of styles in mind when you're designing the workshop. So some people need data, some people really need to know the facts. So you have to have a part of that inside the workshop. So whether you've got survey data or data about your diversity makeup in the organization, or if you've got feedback, that's going to be really helpful for the data people, for the facts people. Some people are more emotional and relationship oriented. So you also need to find a way to speak to the heart. The mind and the heart needs to be connected. So getting them to share their own personal experiences, or hear some qualitative feedback, or even statements around how people are feeling in the organization can be a powerful way to do that. And make it interactive. It shouldn't be a lecture. It shouldn't be a presentation. You need to get them to be thinking about and engaging why this is good for our business. Sometimes you need a bit of data to get started, such as providing benchmarks and comparisons to the competitors to create a sense of urgency. But also sometimes there's other benchmarks that you can use for them to be able to, as a group, assess where are we now and where could we be in years to come, and to create that joint vision of the future. And then from there, you can start thinking about some actions and next steps to make this journey a lot more formal inside of the business strategy. So those are some components I would recommend to start with, especially with the top leadership team. Is there anything that you would add, Eleanor?
I think one thing maybe to keep in mind is often on an intellectual level, the people have maybe already engaged with the topic, right? I mean, there's so many articles and research, and they probably will have read the articles about there's a business case for diversity, or, some of the big famous studies, McKinsey and BCG and all of those ones that have been recommended. But managing to move away from that intellectual understanding to actually, okay, what does this mean practically? What does this mean for the people in the organization or in their teams, and for their particular case as a business case or on a personal level as well? I think that's what really makes a huge difference. And that's also the challenge sometimes in understanding DEI, right? It's okay on an intellectual level. It's so easy to understand why it's important, but how does this translate into actions and into real life?
Yeah, and I think maybe to feed that kind of discussion, there are some other more impactful ways that you can engage, especially teams with a majority of men in them. We partner with an amazing association here in Switzerland called Advance, and they have developed a workshop which utilizes virtual reality, so the Oculus 2 headset, to put men into the body of a woman in the workplace. It's a really great scenario that they get to experience over 20, 30 minutes, and they get to experience firsthand being in the body of a woman, but also experiencing what women, especially at leadership level, are facing on a day-to-day basis, from microaggressions to discrimination, to the assumptions that are being made of them as women. And when you've been through that kind of experience, you really do have empathy building towards the other gender and the challenges and barriers that they're facing. And I think it provides that stimulus to be engaged in that conversation around actions and next steps. Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if we sort of think on in this scenario, so assuming me as a new DI manager, or you, we've managed to engage the top management team. We have their commitments. We have someone from the C-suite who's also a bit of a host or sponsor for this topic, but in the organization, maybe there's still a feeling of insecurity about what does this really mean, and also, is it sincere or is it just superficial because we have to do something around DEI? So how do I go sort of to the next level where people are really understanding this is a cultural shift and are taking up initiatives, be it policy changes or training offerings?
Yeah, I think people need to see that there is some actions being taken in the systemic side of this work. And what I mean by that is, like you say, policies, processes are being reviewed, and then maybe there's some follow-up training to help people catch up and upgrade their skills on where those policies and processes need to be actively applied and implemented. And then what we also need to be seeing is how people can feel empowered to act themselves, because if you don't get them engaged in seeing the way this plays a role for them and how it benefits them, they can really keep it at an arm's length and still view it as a concept that really doesn't concern them. I think especially people who are in the majority or in the insider group, because often they enjoy so much privilege in the first place. They're not being affected in any way by some of the issues connected to this topic. So one thing would be, if you are looking to invest in upgrading your policies and processes, often it starts with recruitment. And I think that's Eleanor's little doggy.
Sorry.
You all, so please excuse that.
He's joining the conversation a little bit, has an opinion on this as well.
It is, I think, so there's three things I would recommend. The first is, if it's policy process related, then give training to the people who need to enact and apply that policy and process. So whether it's inclusive recruitment and giving hiring managers the skills on how to be more objective and fair in this process, to say you're introducing extended parental leave and carer leave, how are the line managers being supported to understand the mindset and the skills needed to support those transitions out and back into work, and really honor the policy that's being implemented. So that's one side. And this, I think the second side would be, get people to understand, it's one thing to do training on unconscious biases, but that in itself doesn't work. There's plenty of research and proof that shows knowing that you have unconscious biases and understanding them doesn't really change anyone. But if you can help people by actually looking at this through the lens of equity, that's, I think, one that's often undervalued, but probably the most powerful and impactful way you can make change happen, is helping people understand that equity is actually the path to inclusion, and giving them some tools to be able to challenge the status quo and make things in their workplace more equitable, especially things that they have influence over, can be a game changer for a culture and for people to develop the behaviors that you want. And then the third thing I would recommend is, often what comes up is that people do want change and they do want to have a voice at the table and be heard, but there's not enough safety to make that possible. And in order to create that safety, you need to be cognizant of where you are with your psychological safety. I think it helps particularly doing it in teams, because then you have this shared language and toolkit to talk about these issues that connect to psychological safety. And then it takes the conversation around diversity and inclusion to a conversation about innovation and improvement and performance, which is essentially the business case for this. And with that, you need to develop skills to be able to have those safe conversations where you feel free to speak up, voice your opinion without any threat of career suicide. And so also training people on feedback skills, so giving and receiving feedback in a non-violent way is a really super powerful way, I think, to make this real and practical.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking exactly along those lines, I suppose, as if someone says, maybe the trust is not quite there, that this is real, or there's some sort of feeling of insecurity, is really taking that seriously and thinking about, okay, where is that coming from, and how can we create kind of that foundational culture of, like you said, of psychological safety, of trust, of being able to have courageous conversations, give each other feedback before maybe going into more depth on some of the specific DEI dimensions or whatever it is that you've identified on that on your roadmap or target, to really creating that kind of foundation of culture that works.
Yeah, and maybe to add to that, Eleanor,
and
this goes without saying for any of these trainings, you should not be doing training for the sake of training. These have to be underpinning a strategy and a roadmap, right? And at the start of every training, you need to connect back to what that strategy and roadmap and vision is, so that people understand why you're doing this and why it's important. So the why needs to be really clearly spelt out for everyone. attending any training. I saw in the comments, Beth has raised a question around how would we handle those who dig in their heels and refuse to embrace change?
I have an answer to that. Do you want me to start? Well, I suppose one thing I would start by maybe not immediately engaging directly with them. My strategy would be colloquially to create a bit of a sense of FOMO, a bit of fear of missing out. So finding a way of putting a little bit of peer pressure on them, that if they don't embrace this change and if they don't join in on the journey, they're missing out a little bit, and missing out, in a fun way as well, and in an engaging way. And they're missing out on really great conversations about culture, but also, like you said before, Natalie, about performance, about where the organization is going, about growth. And so that would be, trying to not directly engage them, but maybe through their peers also bring them into that conversation, so that they feel like if they don't engage, they're really missing out on something good. What about you, Leslie?
Absolutely. There's two things I'd add to that. Never make a training mandatory, especially on this topic, because adult learning principle numero uno is this needs to be engaging for the adult, for the person to want to learn, and they shouldn't be forced into it. So that's the first recommendation. I think the second would be, like you say, it's, not everyone's going to be an early adopter or enthusiastic about this topic. So I agree with what you're saying. And I think if they still don't want to engage, if they still don't want to embrace this change, there's this, there's an outcome to that, is that they're not going to be part of the new culture. And essentially, they're not going to feel like they fit in anymore. And especially when an organization starts to take measures and steps to create accountability on this, it's going to be something that impacts them, whether they like it or not. Yeah. So thanks for the question, Bethany. Are there any other questions we wanted to explore, Eleanor?
Well, yeah, maybe going back to being a DEI manager, as we know also from talking to our clients, Natalie, DEI budgets, at least here in Switzerland, are often not as big as we would wish they were, right? And also for our clients, that we would wish they could really invest in this topic. So we know budgets sometimes are restricted. So having spoken about everything we've talked about now, engaging top management, but also finding ways of engaging the people, the rest of the staff, how do I do that with a restricted budget? What would you recommend starting with?
Yeah, there's a few different ways you can do it. If you do have a little bit of budget, you could start with some shorter workshops or even webinars, because I know we have a huge catalogue of those just for that very purpose, because sometimes that's just how it is, and you want to be able to feed people something and get them engaged on it. So keeping it short, and maybe starting with topics like the fundamentals of IDEA, so inclusion, diversity, equity, access, could be a really great way of sensitizing people on these terms and this topic and why it's important, or giving them something more practical like feedback. Giving and receiving feedback is such a great tool for so many people, not just around diversity, equity, inclusion, but just for having healthier workplaces. It's the way to start. And my favorite is, if you have a little bit more budget but still not a lot, is go for the train the trainer approach. And I know we offer quite a few more popular trainings with this, because then you customize it to your business, but then you get to train up a group of trainers and facilitators inside your business to go out and scale it without the need of having to hire a provider like us to do all the training. You can be empowered and self-sufficient to do it yourself. Is there anything else you would add, Eleanor?
No, I think, like you say, thinking about kind of a webinar journey that's really open for people to join, it's a more sort of flexible format. But again, also not thinking of it as one-off interactions, right? Thinking of a little bit how it connects, and maybe, maybe doing a little bit of communication around it. There's also a lot of great free resources that you can then add on to that, right? So it's not only, I think, doing some training and having those conversations and doing it in an interactive way is super important, but also thinking about what else is there out there that's kind of in between the trainings you can add to the sort of full journey. And then I suppose at some point, maybe looking at having that conversation with the management about, isn't the topic important and wouldn't it merit a little bit more budget, which maybe takes us back to the kind of data side that you said at the beginning, Natalie, right? To really be able to show them, this is where we're at, this is where we could be, and these are steps to really achieve the change that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I see a lot of companies also inviting external speakers to come and speak for free. That has been a trend. And I would urge you that if you're thinking of actually inviting a speaker, especially someone who's from an underrepresented group, please pay them because, they're getting asked to do a lot of this for free. And that's not fair in any way whatsoever, especially when this person has expertise. So you have to also, I think, find some way to reward or recognize them, because I think there's a large community of DEI consultants and trainers who are getting tired for being asked to do this for free. So you've got to figure out a way to make this rewarding for them too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Oh, so many questions, Natalie. There haven't been any more questions from people watching live, right? So if you have more questions, we also have time for your questions, but otherwise I always have more questions for Natalie. There's no worry about that. So maybe just one question about engaging on these journeys. One question we hear a lot is also how do we engage the people to then join and to participate and to share experiences, and what do I have to take, being in the shoes of a DEI manager again, what do I take into account for that to really also not only decide on which trainings or webinars or whatever it is am I delivering, but also how do I get the people to participate and engage? And
well, there's a few tips here. I think when it comes to promoting and getting sign-ups, you have to have the skills of a very talented copywriter. You've got to use some psychological nudges to have people want to attend this and see the benefit in it. Now, I've been testing ChatGPT the last couple of months to see how well it writes copy to create very enticing ways of introducing and promoting a workshop to see if is it as good as a human. And I'm happy to say it's actually pretty good. So if you don't have any copywriting skills to write your promotions and your emails, then use ChatGPT because it could be really helpful to get you started in writing.
Just remember to use your unconscious bias training when you're proofreading ChatGPT, right? You don't want all the biases stuck in ChatGPT sneaking into your communication as well.
Definitely, you need to have a human review and copy edit the final version. So that's to promote it. I think also try to plan for the training or the workshop to be interactive as much as possible, ideally experiential, because humans learn by doing. And I know that we are the biggest fans of that approach, and that's probably a signature to all our trainings, is we don't just do, talking head. We have to have interaction, whether it's individual reflection, group discussions, role plays, simulations, scenarios, and case studies. All of that needs to be part, or some of that needs to be part of your training to actually make it very practical and tangible for participants. And I think that will lend itself to really good feedback and for people recommending it to their colleagues. So on that last tip, really try to leverage testimonials from feedbacks or anecdotes that people share during or after the training to aid your promotion efforts. Use those let's call them graduates or alumni of trainings to also promote it to their colleagues and friends in the workplace, because word of mouth is really powerful. So really capitalize on having people help you do the promotion.
I think also maybe to connect to one thing you said at the beginning as well, right? Having that management engagement also really helps. So having managers explicitly also joining some of the training sessions, or explicitly telling people, it's my expectation that you do take an hour or 2 hours, or however long the sessions are, half a day, to attend these trainings. They're explicitly giving them permission, or even going further than permission, really saying this is an expectation, that it's a priority that you take that time to attend these trainings and to engage on that topic. I think that's really powerful as well, and wonderful, I think, when you do have those mixed groups of staff and leaders as well. Although that's maybe a question we're often also asked, does it make sense to have leaders and staff in the same group? Which I think, again, brings us back to that question of, do you have that culture of trust and feedback and psychological safety? I think if you do have that foundation of psychological safety, where leaders can share with staff and feel comfortable being vulnerable, and staff is comfortable being vulnerable in front of their leaders, then it's fantastic to have those mixed groups with the different perspectives, and fantastic to see leaders role modeling in those situations as
Absolutely. Well. And I think that there will always be a case of there's a situation where you are trying to promote your trainings, but no one's engaging because maybe you've been doing them for some time, but nothing actually changes because of it. So again, going back to this systemic connection, there needs to be consequences or commitments that come out of these trainings that are followed up with. Because if people just see this as a tick box exercise or training for the sake of training, they will over time become a lot more reticent and disengaged because they don't see any change, or because maybe you're not designing it in a way for them to also lead some of the change needed. They don't see being part of their job. So that could also sometimes influence disengagement, and you need to think about these factors and build them in to the learning journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially a lot of what we talked about today is kind of the beginning of the journey a little bit, right? Engaging people, increasing awareness, which is fine for a little while, right? To make a lot of noise around the topic, so people are, hearing about it and they have an understanding of the terminology and what we actually mean. And then over time, right, with increased, we talk about DEI maturity sometimes as well with our clients, right? So Natalie, you want to start thinking about, okay, how are we engaging in a more targeted way, in a more strategic way as well? So it's really a cohesive kind of journey, and where change is truly happening also with trainings and learning on one hand, but also policies in the background being changed. It can be small things around communications or use of images. It can be work on use of language, that there are other kind of, or recruitment. It was also an example you said before, Natalie, that there are other things kind of going on at the same time.
Yeah. Now I can see a question come up from Maher about how can we measure the diversity, equity, inclusion progress in organizations? Are there specific metrics? So there are a number of ways that you can do that, Maher. One of the ways is that you can follow some benchmarking in specific topic areas. So you can self-assess as an organization, or be assessed if you want to pay someone to do that, where you are in some of these areas, whether it's recruitment, talent development, or even leadership and governance, or communications. There's many areas that you can get assessed. And then once you have your benchmark of where you are, you know what it takes, that the benchmarks show you what it takes to get to where you could be. So that's one way to do it. Many companies create diversity, equity, inclusion dashboards or metric dashboards with lead and lag indicators. So there's some clear outcomes, but then there are the things that you can do to influence those outcomes that are also being tracked and measured. So that could be anything from retention, recruitment, promotion, who's getting the share of training opportunities or special projects that enhance careers in the organization. There could be metrics around sentiment, so how people are feeling or perceiving the organization and the culture. You could be reporting on so many things. If you have employee resource groups, they could be reporting on how engaged people are with the topics and the events that they're managing and offering to the organization. And if you're a lot more advanced in your maturity as a business, You can even start measuring how this is driving certain innovations or projects and what impact that's having on the bottom line. You could, if there's concerns around well-being, you could be measuring sick or medical day leave rates. So there's a lot out there that you can be doing.
And you can use surveys as well, right? I mean, we also, one of our other wonderful partners is a specialized survey provider around inclusion. So doing that as a baseline and then over a certain period checking in on that's also a great way. Or maybe you have an employee survey as well, and there's some questions in there that you can leverage to look at the change. I'm just aware that it's half past, so we don't want to steal too much more of people's lunch breaks if they were focusing on us rather than eating their lunch. Were there more questions? I don't think so.
Not for the moment. And just to remind you all, we've recorded the session, so we will be posting a recording both on the LinkedIn company page as well as our webpage. So do take a chance to look at that or share it with your colleagues or friends if you think this was helpful. And please feel free to also send us any feedback or questions. We always want to make sure that these LinkedIn Lives are as helpful and valuable to you as we hope they are. There will be many more coming up. I think next month, Debbie,
focusing
the other CEO, is
yeah.
going to do one on caring and career and the importance of that as a strategy to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. Are there any final words from you, Eleanor?
Well, just I suppose say thank you for everyone who is here live with us today, but also thank you to those who take the 30 minutes to watch the recording whenever you have time to do so. And thanks, Natalie, for the conversation. It was a great conversation for me. I hope it was for everyone else.
Yeah, it was for me too. It's really great. Thank you for your questions, and we look forward to seeing you at the next LinkedIn Live. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.